Welcome. In this video, we're going to cover built-in variables you'll probably need as you're using Google Tag Manager. Built-in variables, or variables for that matter, are key to Google Tag Manager as you're creating tracking with tags and triggers to help you measure and track user engagement with your web properties. So variables capture data or information from the user's engagement, from the user's visits or sessions, and you can leverage those variables to pass that data into your tags, into your tools like Google Analytics, or if you have a session recording tool, you can send a variable with the user ID or any other information that you want to attach to specific session recordings, for example. To send that data to those tools, you'll use Google Tag Manager to create tags that will leverage variables and capture dynamic values to send to those tools. So for example, with this Google Analytics event tag to capture file downloads, we have the event dimensions here, the event category, event action, and event label. The event category dimension is static, as it will always send this value for downloads. But the event action is using a user-defined variable for the file extension, grabbing the file extension from the URL. And then this event label dimension uses the click URL, which is a built-in variable, and we'll cover that later. So the data in Google Analytics looks like this. Downloads, and then if we drill down into downloads, this is the file extension, PDF. And if we continue to drill down, then we have the full click URL. So that this data and those values matches or corresponds to these values that are defined here by these variables. Then you'll create triggers in Google Tag Manager to define the conditions in which your tags will fire. And with these triggers, you can use these variables as well. So here for this file download trigger, this link click trigger, we're using the page URL, built-in variable, and then the click URL built-in variable. And there's a video that covers how to create tracking for file downloads in the description. So let's look at the built-in variables that are available in Google Tag Manager. So if you go to your Google Tag Manager, this is the kind of the home page that you'll see. And in the left navigation menu, you'll see something for variables. So click on variables, and if you have a new GTM container, these are the sections that you'll see, and you probably won't have any variables in this enabled. So in the top section, we have our built-in variables, and let's click on configure. As we go through these variables, I'm going to use another GTM container so that we can take a look at the data that is captured for each of these variables. Now, I don't have triggers configured for all of these variable types, but we'll see what kind of data we capture in our GTM preview mode. So I'm going to go over to this other GTM container for our test website. Click on preview. Make sure the website is correct and click on connect. And then run through a few actions on this page so that our variables can connect some data. And I think that should be good enough. So we'll go back to our Tag Assistant tab for our preview mode. Click on continue. And if you click on variables, this is where all your variables will be listed. But you need to click on one of the messages under this summary section. So for example, if I click on scroll depth, you can see all the variables that you've enabled and the data that it's collected. The first section we have here is variables for pages. So that includes the page URL, which is the full URL of the current page. So if we look at the web page that we're on right now, it's this entire URL here. The page hostname is the subdomain and domain here. So in this example, it's tagmanager.google.com. Page path, it's the path portion of the current URL. So basically everything after the host name. So all of this here. And then the refer provides the full refer URL for the current page. So if your traffic came from a referral link, then it would provide the URL refer with this variable. If we go to our Tag Assistant and take a look at our page variables, you'll notice in the variable column, all the variables are listed in alphabetical order. So we can go down to our page variables and we can see our host name here, page path, page URL, which has spilled over into another line. That's why there's a plus symbol between the two quoted values. And then our HTTP refer variable. And then for utilities, these utility variables are primarily associated with Google Tag Manager. So this event variable accesses the key in the data layer labeled as event. So if we look at an example here and look at the developer tools, type in or click on the console section. Let's clear this. Type in data layer. It includes any of these events, any of these line items with event keys. So the gtm.dom, gtm.load, all these events. And then we have the environment name variable, which will give you the name of the environment. For example, if it's a preview environment or if it's live, latest, or now editing. If there's any other cases, then the variable will be an empty string. So you can find this if you go to the preview mode from your Google Tag Manager, enter your URL, connect, wait for the page to load, click on continue, and Over on the right side here, there's this previewing label. So you can edit container environment or the version here, and if you click on it, you can see the environments, and it gives you the environment ID and environment name. So this is where it pulls that variable. And then we also have the container ID, which provides the GTM containers ID. So for example, with this GTM container here, this is our container ID. This might be useful if you are implementing or using multiple GTM containers on one website. And then container version, it just provides the version of the GTM container. Random number is exactly what it sounds like. It just generates a random number value. HTML ID allows custom HTML tags to indicate whether they succeeded or failed, and it's used with tag sequencing. That is, you can order tags and it'll tell you whether it's successful or not. In our Tag Assistant tab, we can find our event variable, which matches the message that we selected. So we have gtm.scrollDepth. We also have our container ID. This matches our container, our GTM container ID that we're working with here. We have our container version, as well as something for HTML ID, but this isn't applicable to us because we're not using tag sequencing. Next we have error variables, and the first one is error messages. The error message variable, and it grabs the gtm.errorMessage key from the data layer, and it gives you the actual error message that's displayed. The error URL variable uses the gtm.errorURL key in the data layer, and this will provide you with the page URL on which the error occurred. The error line variable uses gtm.errorLine in the data layer, and this will return the line number in the HTML file, the file of your web page where the error occurred. The debug mode variable returns true if you're using the preview mode with Google Tag Manager. We don't have any data for the errors variables, but we can still see those variables here. Error line, error message, error URL, but we do have some data for the debug mode, which is true as we are in the preview mode. Then we move on to clicks, where all of these variables are captured when you use a click trigger. That is when you set a click trigger in your Google Tag Manager for whatever tag you're using. So the click element variable uses gtm.element in the data layer, and it captures the DOM element on which the click occurred. So for example, if you click on an image, a text, or a button, it will capture the click element. Click classes uses gtm.element classes from the data layer, and it provides the classes attribute on the element that was clicked. Click ID uses gtm.elementID from the data layer, and it provides you with the ID of the element that was clicked. The click target variable will give you where a linked document was opened or a linked page. For example, if it was opened in a new tab or within the same frame. The click URL gives you the URL of the item that was clicked, of the element that was clicked. The click text returns the text that was clicked. So personally, out of all of these click variables, the only one that I really haven't used is the click target. Let's take a look at the data that we have for our clicks variables. Now we need to change the message that we select to something that would capture click data variables. So I've selected this link click, and this is the data we have for click classes, click element, this entire string here, click ID, click target, click text, click URL. For some of these other click variables, let's try clicking on another link. So we'll go back and scroll down to a page. If we download, what kind of data it'll give us. So now we can see that the click target variable picked something up underscore blank as it opened the link in a new tab. Now even if these click classes and click IDs variables don't capture anything, you can still see the various click IDs and click classes under click element. For example, click ID right here, and click class a dot post outer, anything with a period in front of the string for click classes, and anything with a pound sign or hash mark in front of the string for click ID. Now we go on to the forms built-in variables, and these are pretty much similar to the click variables, except they're for forms. We can go to forms. Forms, we should see similar values as what we see for the click variables, and that is indeed what we see. Then we have the history variables, and these variables capture data when you use a history change trigger in GTM. And history change triggers look for the condition where a new history entry is created. And this is specifically useful for single page applications and virtual page views, when a web page or a website doesn't reload the whole page, but it just updates the content on the page. So the first variable is the new history fragment, and this will return the fragment of the URL. This is the portion of the URL after the hash marks. So for example, if we go to this web page here, so this is the URL at the top, but if we look at look at these links, these URLs, in the bottom left corner you can notice URLs with a hash mark for various sections. So these refer to anchor links, and you can use the history change trigger to look for this data. And if we put it in the URL here, it would be this portion. So if a user clicks on one of these links, the new history fragment would be this portion of the URL. And that brings us to the old history fragment, which is the value or the portion of the URL before the history change. So if I was on this part of the URL, if I clicked on that part of the URL and I scroll back up, this would be the old history fragment if I clicked on another link with a history fragment. The new history state variable captures the state object that is pushed into a browser's history stack when a history event occurs, and the old history state variable captures the state object before the history event occurs. And the history source variable captures the source of the history entry added to the browser's history stack. For virtual page views and single page applications, this is the push state method. This isn't applicable for us since we're not using virtual page views, nor are we using a single page application. Then we go on to our video's built-in variables. These variables are used when you create a video trigger for embedded YouTube videos. So the video provider variable will be YouTube. The video status variable will be whatever state the video is in when the tag fires. So that could be play, pause, or stop. The video URL is the URL of the video source. The video title, self-explanatory. Video duration is the duration of the video in seconds. Video current time is the time in seconds at which the tag fires. Video percent is the percent of the video played at which the tag has been fired. And then the video visible is a variable that will return true if the video is visible on the web page, on the viewport to be exact, and false if it's not visible. For example, it could be further down the page or hidden in the background. Let's go to our test website while our GTM is still in preview mode. We'll go back to the home page and click on this post right here with 2 embedded YouTube videos. And we'll click on play for this. And then we'll click on play for this one as well. So I've muted both of them. I'm letting them run for a little bit. And then I will click pause on this one. And I'll click pause on, well, I'll actually click through this a bit. And then click pause on the second video. Go back to our tag assistant and we have a bunch of YouTube messages here. So if we click on this first one that we see, here are our videos built-in variables. So you can see the current time is 0, the video duration over 1100 seconds, video percent played through 0, video provider of course, YouTube, video status, start, the video title, and then the video URL, and video visible, set to true. And we can click on one of these. We see that the current time was updated, video percent was updated as we are clicking through, video status, seek. We were clicking through the timeline, and those are our video variables. And then we have our scrolling built-in variables. These scrolling variables can be captured when you create a scroll depth trigger. So the scroll depth threshold variable would capture a value that indicates the scroll depth, which causes a tag to fire. So this could be either a percentage or it could be the number of pixels. The scroll depth units variable is either pixels or percent. So it indicates the units for the actual scroll depth. And the scroll direction variable is either vertical or horizontal. We can take a look at our scrolling variables, but let's choose a scroll depth message so that we can see some data there. So for scroll depth threshold, we have 90% as we can see the scroll depth units, and then the scroll direction is vertical. And finally, we have the visibility built-in variables, and these are captured by using visibility triggers. So the percent visible is a numeric value that indicates how much a specific element on the page is visible when the trigger fires. And the on-screen duration variable is a value that indicates how many milliseconds the specific element is visible. Let's look at our visibility variables. So here's our percent visible. Since we don't have a visibility trigger here, it's undefined, and that's the same case with our on-screen duration variable here. These are all the built-in variables that you can enable for your tags and triggers. The most common built-in variables that you'll probably want to enable are the page variables. From the utility variables, it would be the event, clicks, all the click variables, and all the form built-in variables. If you have a single page application or want to track virtual page views, then enable your history variables. Videos, if you have embedded YouTube videos, scrolling variables, and visibility variables. So you can just click all the variables that you need and click out of that section, and now you have your built-in variables enabled. There's a lot you can do with the tags and triggers using these built-in variables in GTM. There's a lot of data that you can capture and send to various tools so that you can gain insight to improve the user experience for your web properties. So that's it for now. We'll catch you in the next episode.